Hi everyone, Stepan here. I'm going to show you my round 3 game from the Sesvete Open. I faced Cupic, who is a strong Fide Master, and he plays the Caro-Kann. So I decided to go e4. I wanted to play against the Caro-Kann. The game was very interesting. So e4, c6, and we get, let me just turn down the volume, and we get the exchange variation after d4, d5, e, d, c, d, bishop d3, knight c6, c3. Now in this position, knight f6 is most common, but he played queen c7. Okay, I played the move knight e2. This plays against bishop g4. Black would like to develop the light squared bishop before playing e6, and this doesn't pin the knight, and it allows f3. So bishop g4 castles, e6, and now queen e1. Queen e1 is a key move because after f3 you have queen h4 chasing the bishop further down the board. So for example, if bishop d6, then f3, and this pawn isn't hanging because if bishop h2, king h1, and you're threatening both g3 and fg. So the most common move here is actually to give up the bishop pair, bishop e2, but he played knight f6, and this now allows f3, bishop h5, and queen h4. And of course, the idea behind queen h4 is the h-pawn is pinned. So he could go rook g8 here. This is a theoretical move, but so is bishop g6, which he did end up playing. And this is all still theory and all still preparation, both I would bet his and mine. So bishop takes, f takes, knight f4, king f7 is forced, defending both pawns, and now knight d3. And you're playing against e5, and you want to go bishop f4. So if black doesn't go bishop d6 now, then, you know, you're never going to develop that bishop to a sensible diagonal. You have to go bishop d6. But there's bishop f4 now, and we exchange everything, and white is left with a slightly better structure. So bishop takes, queen takes. I took with the queen and offered the draw. Before we continue looking at the game against Lovro, I would like to thank Chessbook, the sponsor of today's video, a great way to work on your repertoire. So what you can do with Chessbook is you can import your repertoire and then practice it. You get to practice the moves you've imported either by hand or by importing a PGN. And you can also connect your Lichess and or chess.com accounts and work on the mistakes from your games. So my repertoire is not complete yet. I'm playing a tournament at the moment, so I'm practicing lines that I'm actually going to be playing in games, but in time, it's going to be complete. But even so, I have 900 moves left for review. So what you can do is you can, let's say, go to your white repertoire, add something else. And let's say I want to add a line against, sorry, I wanted to add this line against Lovro. So c6, d4, d5, takes, bishop d3, knight c6, c3, queen c7, knight e2. Okay, so this is how the game went. I castled, he played e6, I played queen e1, and let's keep adding moves. So in this position he played knight f6, here, yeah, bishop g6 takes, f takes. Okay, so let's say this is my repertoire, and let's save them to my repertoire. Now I can practice them. So this is the most basic thing, and you can also do this by importing a PGN. So you keep practicing, Importing a PGN is easier, so I usually do that. I create a study in Lichess and then import it. Now another thing you can do is you can review your online games. So let's see what I have for review. Okay, so this is my game against Ozren. In this position, you played bishop f5. Well, the correct move is c6. Now I know. Okay, c6. So you can review your online games. Okay, queen c7 here. And one more feature is that you can play through a model game. And this is a very useful feature because I usually do solitaire chess, which is guessing the next moves in Grandmaster games. And Chessbook makes this much easier. So visit the Chessbook link in the description below. It's a great platform. I've been using it throughout this tournament. It's been helping a lot. And for now, at least, the tournament is going well. I'm not saying it's because of Chessbook, but it's definitely making it easier to prepare for games. The basic version is free. The premium version is $5 a month, and it's worth every penny, I would say. Thank you very much. Let's get back to my game against Lovro. Partly because he is a much stronger player, so I'm happy with the draw. And secondly, because I knew the evaluation in this position, this is just slightly better for white. And to be honest, I was tired. It was a double round day. My previous video, the game against my coach, was played in the morning, and I was among the last to finish, and I was absolutely exhausted, so I didn't feel like a 5-hour game, 5-hour end game actually. But he declined. He took Queen F4, which is fine. I mean, I would have declined in his place as well. Knight takes F4, and now E5 is basically also forced. All of this is forced. And this position I actually had on the board when I was preparing for the game. And I couldn't decide what to do. Knight A3 is interesting, playing against Knight C4. So is H4, preventing G5. But I ended up going for Rook D1. Rook E1 is also okay, by the way, because Rook D1 now allows me, after G5, to go Knight D3. And on Knight C4, here I wasn't really sure what to do anymore, or I couldn't remember. I knew that Knight D2 was bad because of Knight E3, so I just ended up playing King F2. Now the only problem with King F2 is that after G4, sorry, there could be a pin along the F file, so he played Rook HF8, and now I have to worry about G4. Of course, if I take this, then I'm worse. And the point is, positionally, I always have to keep control of the E4 square. This is the key square in the position, so I basically don't want to take. Okay, I played Knight D2. The pawn cannot be taken because the knight is on D3, and even if it weren't, then this would fail to Rook B1 if my king wasn't on F2. He played Knight D6, and now I went back to G1. King G1 may seem like a weird move, but it's playing against G4. If I don't play that, if I play, let's say, Rook E1, then G4, and this is already a tough position. For example, takes, check, and well, something like this happens, and he brings the king back to F8. My knight is tied down to defending F2. This pawn is actually useful. So King G1. He played H5, understandable, and now I didn't know whether I should go H3 or not. One tactical pattern in this position is Knight E5 check. So whenever he plays G4, I have Knight E5 check with another attacker on G4. So in the event of H3, now that my king is on G1, G4 would be a blunder because of this, and I'm simply a pawn up. Not that it's a good pawn, not that I'm going to keep the pawn, but still, it's a very pleasant position, I would say. I'm actually going to keep the pawn if he plays Rook F4 straight away. So I was debating between H3 and Rook E1, but I ended up going for Rook E1. I wanted to have activity instead of an extra pawn, and he doesn't have to go G4, of course. He played Rook AD8, I played Knight B3, G4, and now Knight D4. If he takes, I take with the pawn. Knight D4 wasn't about that, it was about bringing another attacker into play. He played Rook Fe8. Now that my king is on G1, the rook is basically useless on the F file. And now Knight E5. The king went to G8, and I took on G4. I wanted him to have doubled H pawns, although this wasn't the best move. This is probably not my first inaccuracy. If you turn on the engine plays Knight D3 or Knight G6 or A4. A4 I don't understand, but Knight G6 I do understand. FG4 is still okay, the position is just equal. HG4, and now Knight G6. Knight G6 is an okay move. My idea was to get the knight to F5 and to G3 and to control the E4 square, and that way I'm blockading the doubled isolated G pawns and I have some control over E4. He played Knight C4. I played Knight E7 check, going to F5, King F7, Knight F5, and G6, Knight G3. This was my plan. I want to control E4. If he jumps into E4, I believe the position is simply winning for white. After something like this, I can go B3. And then the knight has to move away, and then this pawn is going to be under pressure, like this, for example. And I believe this is too much. I believe I can just safely win the pawn with something like Knight G3. Okay, but he went Rook B8, and now that the pawn is defended, the B2 pawn is actually hanging. So this whole game we were fighting over whether I'm going to play B3 or not. if I play b3, I have a weakness on c3. And normally you want to avoid having a weakness. But at this point, I wasn't really sure what to do if I don't play b3. I can go rook b1, rook e b1, but that seemed extremely passive, so I played b3. He went back to d6, and now I went a4. And the idea behind a4 is simply to go knight b5. If he does nothing, for example, like this, then knight b5 is a great position for me. If he takes, there's a weakness on a7, which is going to fall eventually. It's very tough to defend this pawn. So of course against a4 he went a6, and now I went a5. A5 may have been a positional inaccuracy. The engine still says it's equal. I wanted to blockade the pawns. Basically, if I'm gonna have c3 under pressure, then I want to control 2 pawns with 1 pawn, if I can. He played rook bc8, I took, he took, I played rook c1, he played rook e3, and now I blundered. So the only sensible move here is king f2, which I did see. And he cannot go to d3 because king e2 just wins the rook, so that's out of the question. So if I go king f2, he has to go back. And I don't know, I go knight e2 or something, I do something. But I saw a variation which seemed great in my mind. It's not great. It's close to equal, but black is the only one with the possibility for a large advantage. I went c4. And the point is, after rook d3, I go c5. And the engine now gives this as -1 for black. If he moves the knight, let's look at that first. Then I can go c6, and that's obviously great because now I go c7 and I queen. So he cannot do that. So he has to take my knight. I take his knight. He goes king e6. This was all my calculation. Now, slight advantage to black, -0.5 according to the engine. So it's not a losing blunder, but I went from an equal position to a complicated position. This is the logical follow-up, and this was the idea. The idea was rook c7, rook b4 forced, rook g7 forced, king d6 forced. If he... well, what else can he do? If he takes on b3, I think I have a good position, because now he cannot take the pawn on d6. Something like rook b1 and king f2, I don't know. King e5, probably d7. If he takes with the knight, then I take on g4, and this should be equal, because I have a pawn on a5. So if he plays something like rook here, then I just start pushing it. He is too slow. So he has to take on d6. I take on g6, he plays king e5, defending the knight. I go rook g5, and I was calculating all of this before c4, and it seemed great, because after king e6, I have knight e2. And I saw this far, and I saw that he cannot take on b3, because he loses the rook. And I figured, well, this is great. This is much better than playing king f2, which is stupid. King f7, going away from the pin. Now, it should be close to equal. If I go h4, if I create a passed pawn straight away. After rook b3, I go knight f4, and I'm threatening to push my pawn. This should be close to equal. Should be close to equal, with the ideas of rook f5 and knight takes. But I played rook f5 straight away, which is the losing move. Now, why? After rook takes b3, I go knight f4. He goes rook b5, of course. I'm not taking the pawn. And more importantly, after d4 saving the pawn, I cannot take the rook because the knight endgame is completely losing. So I went king f2, which does nothing. He took on a5. Now d4 cannot be played. I should point out that if knight h5, since d4 doesn't work, black isn't losing because there's still king g6. So something like this. This is a dead lost rook endgame. So rook a5, I went king g3. Rook b5, preparing d4. Knight h5, losing, and I knew I was losing at this point, but and I don't know why I didn't resign. It's just inertia, I guess. He went king g6, rook f6 takes, check, rook e5, king f6. I have to decline the rook trade, so rook h6, and the game ended like this. Here I finally resigned. It's of course a hopeless position, and I have to be honest, this is the first loss I had where I was really not surprised, but amazed with my opponent's technique. He played this equal position so well, and I think I can learn a lot from this game. He navigated it perfectly. He created weaknesses. He sought his chances at perfect points, I would say, and he outplayed me magnificently. So congratulations to Lovro. He is a Fide Master for a reason. I hope you got something from the game. Let me know what you think. Stay tuned for more chess. Bye.